Exactly 1 week after the scene that turned a quiet act into something loud, after a group of students walking past the rear stairwell had jeered at the sight of a security guard leaving part of his lunch for a boy with worn-out shoes, a small wooden box appeared near the same steps. It was early morning, before the first bell, before the lights in the classrooms flickered on, when Willard Bradshaw spotted it. The box was plain, handmade, the kind someone might use to store old marbles or keepsakes, with scuffed corners and a clasp that no longer aligned perfectly. It had been placed just beneath the rusted railing, next to the spot where Willard left half his sandwich every morning. He bit down carefully, knees stiff with age, the cold tightening every joint. The box was dry, even though it had snowed the night before. Someone had protected it. A folded towel lay underneath it, shielding it from the damp concrete. On the lid, carved in uneven block letters, was the name, W. Bradshaw. He blinked slowly. His name hadn't been spoken aloud in years outside of formal documents and the rare phone call from a medical provider. Most people called him Sir or the guard, or didn't call him anything at all. He opened the box there on the step, with breath curling like smoke in the frigid air. Inside, nestled on a bed of crumpled newspaper, were three things: a military dog tag on a worn chain, a piece of notebook paper folded several times, and a pencil sketch, drawn with the careful effort of someone young, but intent. The sketch showed a tall figure in uniform, standing beside a much smaller one. The proportions were wrong. The shoulders too wide, the helmet too round. But there was dignity in the image. And familiarity. He unfolded the paper. The handwriting wavered, letters tipping sideways, some darker where the pencil had pressed harder. But the words had weight. My dad used to stand like you. He was strong too. He died when I was 7. You walk like him. You don't talk much. But you help anyway. Thank you. There was no name, no signature. But the dog tag filled in the rest. Ellis, D. Willard didn't move for a long time. The silence around him deepened. A snowplow passed on the main road beyond the fence, throwing gravel. Lights blinked on in the teacher's lounge. A janitor's radio buzzed faintly through the loading dock. Still, he sat on the step where the boy always waited, the note in his gloved hand, the chain slowly curling against his palm like a memory returning from too far away. He knew the name. Not in detail, not with certainty. But it stirred something, an echo from a list he'd once carried in his pocket during a mission. Ellis was a name you didn't forget. In a convoy, names mattered more than ranks. They were lifelines. They were the voices you heard over the radio, the ones who answered in G*fire or silence. He turned the dog tag over. The engraving was worn, the surface dulled by years of contact with skin, sweat, rain, and grief. But it was intact. Clean. Not a replica. The chain was frayed near the clasp, as if it had been tugged or worn too long. Willard pressed his thumb to it, then closed the lid of the box and tucked it under his arm like something sacred. He didn't tell anyone. Not the principal. Not the other staff. Not even the janitor he sometimes nodded to when their paths crossed near the boiler room. Instead, he placed the drawing inside his locker, pinning it beside the inspection schedule, between an old marine patch and a faded photo of a desert road taken from a transport cab. He looped the dog tag over the hook where he usually hung his thermos and let it swing gently when he opened the locker. Like a heartbeat. That night, he didn't eat the second half of his sandwich. And the next morning, he brought two. One wrapped in wax paper as always. The other in foil, still warm from the SK*let. Eggs and cheese this time, not just peanut butter. No one said anything. Cody arrived at 7:02, 13 minutes earlier than usual, and hesitated near the steps. Willard had already walked past. But the sandwiches were there. And beside them, not a word, not a gesture, just a thermos cup turned upside down as if to say, someone else had been here. The boy sat. The cup remained untouched. But both sandwiches disappeared. In the following days, nothing changed in the way the world moved. Classes rang on time. The snow kept falling in thin layers. Teachers scolded children for hallway noise. But something had shifted in the way Willard walked his route. He no longer checked the stairwell last. He checked it first. The sandwich became a habit, not a gesture. He added a napkin, sometimes a second cup, sometimes a piece of fruit. Never enough to raise questions. Just enough to be noticed by one. And somewhere in the rhythm of their silence, a bridge had formed between two people who had lost more than they ever said, and found in each other a quiet kind of remembering. It happened on a Thursday. The town of Linden Falls stirred to life beneath a sky still heavy with snow clouds, and at 7:58 a.m., four dark vehicles rolled slowly down the icy main road, their tires crunching over frozen gravel. Each one bore the same insignia, a small American flag beside the emblem of the United States Marine Corps. The convoy stopped in perfect line formation in front of Scanlon Hill Middle School. No one understood what was happening at first. The parking lot was only half full. Teachers were still inside, sipping coffee, preparing whiteboards, wiping salt from their boots. The buses hadn't finished arriving. But by 8:10, word had begun to spread, first in whispers, then in rapid texts. Outside the school, a full ceremonial Marine Corps honor guard had assembled. 6 men and 1 woman stood in crisp uniforms, their gloved hands holding the colors high, boots planted evenly in the snow. Another figure stood slightly apart, older, decorated, a commanding presence in a long coat dusted with silver at the shoulders. The kind of presence that made people straighten their backs without realizing it. Inside, students pressed their faces against windows. Teachers paused mid-sentence. Cell phones were raised, capturing stills and video in a blur of confusion and curiosity. Rumors moved fast, everything from a security drill to a politician's visit. But nothing explained the solemnity of the gathering. Nothing explained the way they stood so still in the cold, waiting. Willard Bradshaw had just finished checking the north stairwell. His boots left wide tracks behind him, deep and deliberate. He was tired that morning. Sleep had been thin. His thoughts had been circling the box, the tag, the name. He hadn't seen Cody in 2 days. Not on the steps. Not even on the security cameras during his rounds. He'd mentioned it quietly to the custodian, asking only if the boy was absent. The reply was vague, some kind of meeting at the district office. Something about guardianship. He hadn't asked more. Now, as he exited through the maintenance corridor, blinking into the sharp light of morning, he was met with the sight of the formation standing at full attention. He paused, unsure if he'd walked into the wrong place. His coat was zipped, a sandwich still in his pocket. He looked every inch a janitor, not a veteran. Just a quiet man at the end of a long shift. One of the Marines turned toward him. "Sir. Mr. Willard Bradshaw?" He nodded. His voice, always quiet, didn't come. He just nodded again. "You're needed at the front steps, sir." With respect. Unsure what else to do, Willard followed. The honor guard didn't move. But every head turned as he walked past. He felt it. He hadn't worn his old uniform in decades. His ID tag still listed him as night watch. But this wasn't about uniforms. It was something else. Something that made his steps slower, heavier with each yard. When he reached the front doors, the older officer stepped forward. He removed his glove and extended his hand. "I'm Colonel Mason. United States Marine Corps." Willard shook it. It was firm. The kind of handshake that didn't require words. "We're here on behalf of Sergeant Daniel Ellis," the colonel said. K** led an action during a covert evacuation operation last year. His remains were identified 2 months ago. His last request was that, if anything happened to him, the Corps would make sure his child was not left behind. Willard felt something sink deep in his chest. The dog tag in his locker. The drawing. The name. "We traced records through Veterans Affairs," the colonel continued. "A school official mentioned that a security guard had been watching over the boy. There was movement at the corner of the building. Cody. He stepped forward quietly, jacket zipped too high, mittens stiff with snow. His eyes were clear. Braver than before. But tired. He held something in his hand, a folded piece of paper, corners bent from being clutched too tightly. Willard could see his other hand was empty. No book. No bag. Just that letter. The boy looked up at him. Not with need. Not with fear. But with recognition. As if some missing shape had finally come into view. The colonel stepped back, allowing the two to stand face to face. Cameras clicked in the distance. Teachers gathered near the windows. Students pushed against the glass. Your sandwiches helped, Cody said quietly, almost inaudible over the wind. So I could wait a little longer. The honor guard moved into motion then. A folded flag was presented, not to Cody, not to the school, but to Willard. And it was a certificate naming him as a recipient of civilian commendation for sustained service in the spirit of the United States Marine Corps. The citation read, "For duty beyond the call, for compassion under no command." The colonel spoke again. Sergeant Ellis trained under convoy protocol written during Cold War assignments. Transport and protection drills codenamed Bradshaw 17. He followed your code. Your procedures. Your example. Silence fell heavy. Behind them, the students who had once laughed were now quiet. The teacher who had dismissed the boy's loneliness stood watching with red-rimmed eyes. The principal dabbed a handkerchief against his collar. And Cody, small and still, stood beside Willard, not as someone being rescued, but as someone claiming a place. No one applauded. But no one moved either. It was the kind of silence that says more than sound ever could. And in that silence, Willard Bradshaw stood a little taller. The flag stayed with him. He didn't frame it, or place it on a shelf with medals and photos that no one would ever see. Willard kept it wrapped, stored gently in the same locker where the thermos lived, beside the drawing and the dog tag, each item lined up with soldierly precision. It wasn't display that mattered. It was proximity. Something about the quiet weight of it resting nearby made the cold nights feel less hollow. Weeks passed. The snow deepened, crusting the edges of Linden Falls into a world of grayscale and wind. School remained school, bell schedules, chalk dust, paper snowflakes taped to hallway windows, but things were different now, not in bold strokes, but in the softer details. Cody no longer sat alone behind the building. Instead, each morning, he arrived just before the buses. Still early. Still silent. But now he entered through the front like the others. He carried a new backpack, government-issued, stitched with his name. Inside it were notebooks, pencils, a photograph of his father in uniform, and a folded paper from the day of the ceremony. He kept the dog tag hidden in the smallest pocket, the chain wrapped so it wouldn't rattle. He had not forgotten the step, though. Every afternoon, he passed by it, often pausing for just a breath. Sometimes he touched the railing. Once, he left an apple on the stone. No note. No explanation. Just the kind of offering you make when words are too small. That step, where a sandwich once waited in frost, had become something more. It started with a rumor. A sixth grader said the Marines had come because someone left food for a hungry kid. Then the art teacher added a quote to the school bulletin board, "Kindness is never wasted, even when unnoticed." By the end of February, a local welder had quietly shaped a bronze plaque that simply read, "Here, in silence, a guard kept watch, and a boy held on. In memory of Sergeant Daniel Ellis. In honor of those who serve with hands, not words." The step became a kind of threshold. Not a monument, not exactly. But something sacred. Parents who'd once driven past now parked their cars and walked their kids to the door, just to stop there. Some left notes. Others flowers. One elderly veteran placed a single coin at the foot of the plaque and stood at attention in the snow, eyes closed against the wind. Willard continued his night shifts. Nothing about his routine changed, not officially. He still walked the perimeter. He still reset alarms. He still swept the stairwells before dawn. But now, when his shift ended, Cody was sometimes waiting. It wasn't every day, but often enough that the school quietly allowed the arrangement. The boy didn't say much. He would hold a flashlight while Willard checked locks, or sit nearby in the supply room organizing clipboards. He liked small tasks, things with rules and completion. And he always carried something in his pocket, first a compass, then a folded map, then a stopwatch. One day it was a wrench. Another day, an old maintenance manual. Willard understood. The boy was learning in the only way he knew how, by mimicking steadiness. And so, without ever meaning to, Willard began teaching. Not lessons with chalkboards, but with movement, with ritual. He showed Cody how to test a fire alarm battery without triggering the system, how to strip a wire safely, how to oil a hinge so it didn't squeak in the cold. They spoke only when needed, but the silence between them grew warm, like a cabin slowly heating before sunrise. Spring came quietly that year, announced not by flowers, but by birds returning to the bare trees near the parking lot. The snow thinned. The wind softened. And Willard was offered something unexpected, an invitation to lead a weekly workshop for students, officially, on emergency preparedness and vehicle maintenance. Unofficially, on responsibility. He said yes. He arrived on Tuesdays with a toolbox and a notepad. The students, mostly boys who struggled to sit still in regular class, sat in a semicircle around him. Cody always arrived first. They learned to check tire pressure, jump a dead battery, read a fuse panel. But beneath the grease and diagrams, Willard taught something else, watchfulness. The kind that notices when a lock sticks, or when a boy skips lunch for too many days in a row. By the end of the semester, they named the garden beside the memorial step the Ellis Bradshaw Memorial Garden. Teachers planted it with their students, mostly perennials and low shrubs that could survive Maine's hard winters. A flag flew above it. On the anniversary of the Marine visit, Cody raised it alongside Willard. The whole school watched in respectful quiet. And afterward, someone, no one knew who, placed a plate with a single sandwich on the plaque, wrapped in wax paper, just like before. That was the beginning of Marine Day in Linden Falls. No speeches were made. No parades followed. But on that day each year, students wore red. Veterans were invited to morning assembly. And a chair was left empty in the cafeteria, draped with a flag. Some years, no one asked why. Other years, new students learned the story in pieces, from a drawing, a folded note, or a coin placed near the steps. Willard never asked for recognition. He didn't give interviews. He declined the reporter from the county paper who wanted a photo. But one fall afternoon, he received a letter in the mail. It bore the seal of the United States Marine Corps and read, "To Mr. Willard Bradshaw, your code saved soldiers. Your silence saved a child. Semper Fidelis." He pinned it inside his locker, beside the first note, beside the drawing, beside the tag. And every morning, he checked the back step. Just in case. Because kindness, when offered without question, is enough. And sometimes, the world answers with a whisper that becomes an anthem.